let's start with this broader idea that you're talking about building the economic infrastructure for AI. We've spent many months, years talking about literal infrastructure for AI. Your world's a little bit different. I think just explain the basics of what you mean by that.
Absolutely. So I'm talking to you here from Stripe Sessions, where we have 10,000 people here working on the economic infrastructure for AI. And AI is changing a huge amount of how businesses sell and trade online. And so that could be everything from on the consumer side of things. Customers are now, I mean, you've probably done it, they're researching products within AI apps. And we just had Google announcing that they're joining us. We work with Google and Microsoft and OpenAI and Meta for buying within their apps. And so that's one example where previously you might have Googled around, you might have looked at some reviews online. Now you're doing that product research and actually completing the transaction within AI apps. It's also really changing tech companies how they sell, because previously they might have sold to a human. You know, if you're a Cloudflare or a Vercel, you might have sold to a human buyer. Now coding agents are doing so much work. We can delegate the work to the coding agents. And so increasingly tech companies are selling to coding agents directly, and they're being used by coding agents directly as a result of real people. And so it's completely changing the landscape. It changes how fraud works as well. We're seeing new fraud patterns that businesses have to prevent against. But yeah, the big theme here is that the economy is really replatforming around AI, and businesses have totally different offerings.
I have questions on all of the above, but you're essentially arguing that an AI agent becomes an economic actor in and of itself, right? The old adage that there are two sides to every transaction. But in sort of a meaningful way, what are we talking about needing to happen for a transaction in any medium to be between one agent on one side and an AI agent on the other side?
Yeah, you know, I think when people talk about this, it seems really far off. And maybe part of that is, you know, the examples people give almost sound incredibly far off, where it's like, oh, I'll just have my AI agent plan my entire summer vacation, you know, in France. It's like, no, you love planning the summer vacation. You want to do that yourself. Whereas if you say, okay, you just give your AI, this is the recipe I'm making tonight, buy the things I don't have in the fridge already. Like, that's the kind of delegation that, you know, people are much more comfortable with. And so we think people and AI services will kind of work their way up the trust curve, where again, it's already the case that the research you're doing, the product research you're doing, you do within an AI app, you're probably still confirming that directly. But it might get to the case where you're allowing the AI to make small decisions for you, and especially as it gets to know you. And so again, on the developer side, imagine you're building a website and you need a hosting provider, or you need to buy a domain name for it. Today, it's the case that you go and you like find the domain name buying service yourself, and you go fill out the form and everything like that. You just want a domain name. You can get it from multiple providers. You'd probably be okay with Claude Code or Codex or Cursor, you know, whatever you're using, actually choosing how to buy a domain for you. And so it's already the case that people are doing a lot of interactive buying with AIs, where they're improving the final step. We think people are already starting to have a little bit, and a huge amount of what we announced today is those little decisions. People are delegating them to the AIs. Buying a domain name, again, is the example I would give. And then as they start to see that it works really well, people will just give them more and more rope.
I've been reading a lot about the history between Stripe and Google. So I think people are quite accustomed to Stripe being integrated in Google Pay. The next step is AI mode in search, and then Gemini itself. What does that change? Not just for Google, like its place in e-commerce, but also the habits, how people transact within the parameters of those tools.
I mean, there's a few trends that are overlaid here, I would say. One is checking out is getting much more convenient. Apple Pay and Google Pay within their respective ecosystems have made that much more convenient. We also now we have a product called Link, which we talked a lot about today, and that has gotten to considerable scale. We have 250 million people. You've probably used it around the web, where you see a Stripe link, and it just remembers your details. It makes it more convenient. And so making those purchases, and again, as the volume of purchases goes up, has gotten significantly more convenient. But then again, like we're saying, the place where the purchases will actually happen is starting to change. Where previously, you were doing some research, you find a product you want to buy. I was shopping for a travel adapter recently. It's like, okay, I want one with like an integrated power brick, blah, 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 blah. Eventually, you get bounced out to the website, you're having to fill out all these details. You kind of want to be able to tell your AI app, okay, that's it, yeah, sounds good, please go buy it for me. And that's what's changing, where the transaction is getting pulled into the AI app, where it's already the case where many things you do, you want to be able to say to the AI, yeah, sounds good, please go do it. Again, if you're using a coding agent, it's frequently, yes, go,
right.
Make no mistakes. And people want to do that in a shopping context. And so the purchase gets pulled up into there. And we're seeing huge demand from businesses. We're working with all the biggest brands you can imagine, Best Buy, Kate Spade, all folks like this, who see this new kind of buying that's happening, this new kind of product discovery, and they want to be ahead of it.
But before we move on, just quickly on Google, Google has not historically led in payments. The partnership that you've been through today and the changes of integrating Stripe into AI mode and Gemini, does that change their fortunes in that market?
I think Google has done a phenomenal job in commerce generally. And again, Google Pay is very large and successful within the Android ecosystem. And so I don't think that would be quite a fair characterization. I think they've done a phenomenal job enabling commerce. And again, this is a new tool in the toolbox for them, where now they're enabling within Gemini these amazing agentic commerce experiences, which again, we think just has to be the future because it's so much more convenient for consumers. It's never been the case in technology when you get a way more convenient way of working for consumers, but they pick the less convenient one. It's never happened.
Has to be the future. I want to ask you about the now. John, how many days are we into the singularity?
I should know the answer because we were talking about 119.
And for the Bloomberg Tech audience, you did. I think you're right, based on my research at least, and trying to track you and Patrick's comments. But help the Bloomberg Tech audience out, the basics of the singularity and why you and your brother Patrick, why do you consider us to be in the singularity?
Sure. So we've started half tongue-in-cheek, half not, talking about being into the singularity. And we decided January 1st arbitrarily was day one, and so we're now 119 days into it. And what we're getting at here is, I think for people in San Francisco, it really feels subjectively like something has changed. Something has changed since 6 months ago, where the power of AI applications has really inflected. And Andrej Karpathy actually had some good talking points on this that he tweeted, where it's very dangerous if you kind of were playing with stuff 6 months ago or 12 months ago. You think you know what you're talking about, but your knowledge is actually woefully out of date because things have moved so fast. And in particular, what's really worked well is, I would say, firstly, the coding agents, where you can have Quad Code or Codex or something like that do this long-running task for you. And so you can have, and it's not even just coding, because they're like general productive agents. You can give it a research task. Maybe you're researching something for a piece, and it can go off and search and buy the data it needs and everything like that. And so that's one thing. You're also seeing, things like OpenClaw, this hit product that is a very novel way of interacting with an AI app that gives code execution and persistent memory to kind of consumer AI apps. And what all this ladders up to, and again, why we're talking about the singularity, is the coding models have gotten so good that they are now contributing in a significant way to the rate of improvement of AI itself. And so the AI is really good, and it's getting better as a result of the quality of AI. And so kind of recursive self-improvement is this industry term here. But it feels like we have reached some point of recursive self-improvement over the past 6 months that, again, there's something different in the air in San Francisco.
The economics and business model of software also is changing. I've been looking at what Stripe has been going through today. And so you've introduced what you call streaming payments, but it's the idea that on a per token basis, you're charged in real time. That isn't that straightforward to understand, but token becomes the currency. Yeah. What were you solving for with that?
So the old way of anyone charging for anything was often per seat or on some per subscription basis. And so that could be, a Salesforce or a Workday, was charged on a per seat basis. That could be, Bloomberg. I'm a happy Bloomberg subscriber, and
Thank you.
that is your whatever per month. The Bloomberg terminal, I don't have one of those, but similarly, 25K a year. So everything is like a per person per month per year. That's the old way of doing things. With AI products, there's very significant inference costs that goes into them, and there's huge variability in how much of them you can use. And so you can have your coding agent do a quick job for you, or you can have it off burning GPU time on some huge task. And so all of the AI products that anyone has need to be charged on a per usage basis. It's just like no other way that makes sense. And so we work with all the top AI companies that you would think of, the OpenAI, Anthropic, and Cursor, and Grok, and everyone like that. And they all, once you get beyond some level of usage, it's on a per API request, per token basis. Like that is the new model of charging for any kind of AI-powered product. It's tricky from an infrastructure point of view because you have this like very complex metering challenge to do. And so we really have two products there. The first is we acquired a company called Metronome, which is the leader in usage-based billing. And so you can just whack events into that product, and then it will keep track of how much customers owe and everything like that. Really gnarly technical product. And so that's why that's used by all the top AI companies. But the other thing that's interesting is stablecoins actually now come full circle. And you have a really interesting opportunity for, people have talked with crypto, the opportunity for micropayments for the longest time. And micropayments are always challenging because of the fatigue. Like, you don't want to pay 20 cents per article for Bloomberg because you don't want to be making that decision every time. You don't want to pay per song with Spotify because your finger would always be hovering over the play button, deciding whether it's, whether that extra play really means that much to you. But that's not an issue with the agents. So for any kind of an agentic product, micropayments and micropayments via stablecoins makes total sense. And so we've actually incubated a blockchain called Tempo, which is specifically for the payments use case. And we've been doing a lot of work around that. And so we think, as you think about streaming payments, it actually could be a really interesting application for crypto and stablecoins.
Because it is very much about real time. But in this kind of shift from money to tokens, fraud or threat actors also are taking the same shift, right? Stripe is prepared for that.
So this is really interesting. All of the AI companies we work with are seeing very interesting new threat vectors and fraud vectors because, again, they're selling. And
that includes, by the way, John, I meant to say it earlier, but OpenAI, Anthropic, Perplexity, Meta, they all work with Stripe.
Correct. And it's just like if you have a shop, if you have things of value on the shelf, no matter what kind of shop you're running, you're going to have shrinkage issues and you're going to need to think about theft and how to prevent it. Similarly, AI companies are selling something of value. And so as a result, they see ne'er-do-wells trying to come and abuse free trials or steal inference or anything like that. And so Stripe Radar has become much more critical because of those attempts on people stealing, and there's kind of much more significant attempts on people stealing the products than we saw with kind of software before or something like that. So Stripe Radar in the past month alone blocked, I think it was more than 3 million attempted thefts from attempted bad transactions from just the top AI companies we work with. It's really a big industry. It's one of the big things that AI companies have to think about. And we're using the power of the Stripe network, the fact that we have this kind of bird's eye view across the internet economy to help these companies prevent it.
John, final question really is about the future of the company Stripe. Bloomberg had reported in late February that Stripe was looking at acquiring a part of or all of PayPal. It's the first opportunity I've had, at least, to ask you to comment on that and the rationale behind it, if it's accurate.
We never comment on M&A speculation. We haven't for the longest time. I won't start here, but I would love to, if we ever do anything in any acquisition, I'd love to chat to you about it.
The way that I think about it, let's put the PayPal part to one side, is the economic infrastructure of AI, the relationship with Google through AI Mode and Gemini. What's the consumer story for Stripe, right? If you think about a PayPal, and I appreciate your answer just then, that they have 400 million consumer wallets. Stripe has grown incredibly as a private company, really integrated with some of the biggest enterprises and the AI names you just went through. Is there a future where Stripe is more directly related to everyday people around the world?
Yeah, I think people see day to day the effects of Stripe, but not directly as a consumer brand. You're not necessarily seeing, a ton of instances of the Stripe name in your day to day. But we try to have that effect felt in less friction and everything being easier. And so people buy from Stripe-powered businesses day in, day out, and we are just looking to make it easier for them to do business with them. We're looking to help the businesses launch better products. I think people feel that as a second order effect. People see a little bit of Stripe consumer branding, like again with Link. You probably see it, remembering your payment details around the web as you go. But again, we're just looking to lower friction. We're looking to grow the internet economy. And however we do that, often that's at the infrastructure level, as opposed to, a big shiny kind of consumer app or something like that. That's what gets us excited.